The world is vast, filled with the unexplored, offering not only wonders, but also mysteries without answers. One such mystery is the sudden disappearance of people, a phenomenon that knows no boundaries of age, gender, or nationality. The vanishing of individuals, especially in rural areas, has become one of humanity's greatest enigmas, where each case not only leaves behind enormous questions, but also creates haunting, thrilling stories. When discussing the number of missing persons worldwide, we enter a murky territory where accurate figures seem out of reach. Statistics on missing persons can be quite difficult to establish, as many countries either do not report these cases or do not make the information public. This is particularly true in developing countries, where the recording and tracking of missing persons cases are not done comprehensively. In Africa, Asia, and Latin America, many disappearances may simply fade into obscurity, leaving no trace on official reports. However, even when faced with gaps in the data, experts still estimate that approximately 8 million children go missing each year around the world. This is an astonishing and heartbreaking number, as millions of families are left grappling with unresolved loss. But if we were to include adults in this equation, how much higher would that number rise? No one knows for sure. This only adds to the mystery and complexity surrounding the phenomenon of disappearances, making us even more curious about what is really happening. Notably, the number of missing persons under the age of 21 seems to be significantly higher than those over 21. A statistic from the United States in 2019 recorded that over 448,000 people under 21 went missing, compared to 161,108 people over 21. This disparity is not just a dry figure. It raises deeper questions about the causes and motivations behind the disappearance of young people. Why are young people at higher risk of going missing? Is there something happening in their lives that we do not yet fully understand? While most of these cases may be resolved in one way or another, the frightening reality is that there are still cases where the missing person is never found. These cases are not just sad stories, but major mysteries, where the sudden disappearance of an individual leaves an unfillable void and a series of unanswered questions. Their disappearance becomes not just an event in their lives, but also part of the unsolved mysteries of humanity. Data from the United States indicates that missing persons over the age of 21 account for about 26% of the total number of missing cases. If this situation is similar in other countries, the estimated number of missing persons worldwide each year could exceed 10 million. This is an enormous figure, but it's important to note that there are no official statistics to confirm this. It is merely an estimate based on what we know, and it lacks a range of other factors. This lack of accuracy further adds to the mystery surrounding the phenomenon of disappearance, as we are dealing with an issue where even experts cannot provide a definitive number. One of the most notable aspects of disappearances is that they often occur in rural areas, where people can easily become isolated and lose their way. Remote areas, dense forests, mountains, and desolate regions seem to be the most likely places for mysterious disappearances to happen. This is not by chance. In these places, nature remains untamed and unpredictable, and humans can easily fall victim to forces that we have yet to fully understand. The state of Alaska in the United States is a prime example. It has a missing persons rate nearly double the national average. This can be attributed to its rugged terrain, harsh climate, and vast distances between communities. But regardless of the reasons, the fact remains that disappearances in Alaska also raise difficult questions. Why is the rate of missing persons so high? And is there something specific about these rural areas that makes it easier for people to get lost and vanish? As we continue to explore strange disappearances in the following sections, remember that these are not just numbers on paper, but real stories, real lives that have been forever altered by the unexplainable. These stories are not just warnings about the fragility of life, but are also unsolved mysteries that may forever lie beyond the reach of human understanding. Get ready to step into the world of strange disappearances, where reality and fiction seem to blend. And each story carries a chilling, mysterious vibe. What you are about to read may make you question what is really happening in this world, and whether there is something we don't yet know don't fully understand. But that is impacting our lives every day. On July 1st, 1986, the Warburton family, parents Doreen and Tom, along with their two sons, Gary and Andrew, left Hamilton, Ontario, to visit relatives in Beaver Bank, near Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. It was an ordinary family trip, with hopes of reuniting with loved ones and spending some quality time together. But none of them could have imagined that this trip would turn into a nightmare when Andrew, a 9-year-old boy, mysteriously disappeared without a trace. The Warburton family arrived on July 1st and stayed at the home of Aunt Helen and the Bolgar family on Tucker Lake Road. Opposite the Bolgars' house lived the Carr family, who had twins the same age as Andrew. The 4 boys were close and would often play together whenever the Warburtons visited. That day was no exception, and the group decided to go swimming at nearby Tucker Lake. The boys' parents all agreed, and at 3:40 p.m., 3 of the boys set off for the lake, while Andrew was delayed for some reason. The path to the lake was directly behind the Carr family's house, cutting through a wooded area. This trail split into 2 directions. Turning right would lead to Tucker Lake, while turning left would take you deeper into the forest. The twins' mother, Mrs. Chuth, Violet, was the last person to see Andrew at 4 p.m. as he stood on the back steps of her house. After that, no one saw Andrew again. When the 3 other boys returned home for dinner, they realized Andrew was missing. Immediately, the family and neighbors began a frantic search for Andrew. By 5:45 p.m., the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, RCMP, had been notified, quickly arrived at the scene. A large-scale search was launched, with hundreds of community members participating. One of the first people who thought they had seen Andrew was a boy named Hob McDonald, who had just returned from summer camp. Hob told the police that he had seen Andrew near Beaver Bank River. According to Hob, Andrew had taken off his shoes, crossed the stream, and then put them back on. This information greatly surprised Andrew's parents, because he had previously been very afraid of the river due to an incident involving leeches and had always avoided it. As soon as the RCMP arrived, search dogs were deployed into the forest at 6:30 p.m. Over 100 searchers flooded the area shortly thereafter, but unfortunately, no one found any trace of Andrew. 4 days later, on July 5th, the search continued in desperation as hope of finding the boy alive began to fade. The search efforts extended overnight, with about 400 people scouring the woods near Beaver Bank, approximately 20 kilometers northwest of Halifax. Additionally, around 200 to 300 volunteers were always on standby at the site to support the search team. Mike McKenzie, the search coordinator, stated that the response from the local community was overwhelmingly positive, with more than 1,000 people involved during the peak. However, despite their best efforts, the search yielded no results. Andrew seemed to have completely vanished into the deep woods, alone and afraid. On the 3rd day of the search, the weather, which had previously been favorable, suddenly took a turn for the worse as heavy rain poured down on the area, forcing the search teams to pause for a time. But as soon as the weather improved the next day, the search teams resumed their effort. They discovered some small footprints that they believed belonged to Andrew, but unfortunately, the trail quickly disappeared, and no further clues were found. On July 9th, 8 days after Andrew disappeared, bad news arrived. A soldier from the search team discovered a small pair of shoes, confirmed to be Andrew's, about 2 miles from where the Warburton family was staying. And approximately 100 meters from the location of the shoes, Andrew's body was found in a dense forest area. It appeared that the boy had grown tired, laid down, and succumbed to the cold of the night. The subsequent autopsy revealed that Andrew likely passed away due to hypothermia. This was a heartbreaking conclusion to a mysterious disappearance. Despite the extensive and large-scale search efforts, they were unable to find the boy in time. Many questions remain. Why did Andrew stray from his friends? Why did he venture into a dangerous area that he had once been so afraid of? And was there something that caused him to run, leading to his tragic death? The disappearance of Andrew Warburton remains one of the great mysteries of Nova Scotia, a case where no one has been able to explain what really happened in the boy's final moment. Andrew's disappearance is not just a family tragedy, but also a mystery that has left both the community and investigators puzzled. To this day, the questions surrounding this case remain unanswered. With each strange detail, Andrew's disappearance is only the beginning of other mysteries that we will explore in the following section. Other disappearances, with even more terrifying circumstances, will continue to make us question what really happened and whether we will ever find the answers. Matthew Green, a 39-year-old intelligent man with a passion for mountaineering, disappeared without a trace in July 2013. Matthew's disappearance is one of the strangest cases to have occurred in the eastern Sierra Nevada mountains, near Yosemite National Park, California. It is a story filled with mystery, with perplexing details that leave anyone who hears it feeling both confused and curious. Matthew was a high school math teacher, a man with a logical and cautious mindset. Outside of his teaching career, he was also an experienced climber, who frequently participated in climbing trips with friends during his free time. In mid-July 2013, Matthew arrived in the small town of Mammoth Lake, a popular destination for outdoor enthusiasts. This area, known for its rugged terrain and breathtaking mountain landscapes, was a place where Matthew and his friends often visited to indulge their passion for climbing. The trip initially was a success. Matthew and his group of friends had an amazing time conquering the peaks in the area. However, just as they were preparing to leave for Colorado for another climbing trip, Matthew's car broke down. The engine failed, forcing Matthew to stay in Mammoth Lakes for repairs. His friends left ahead of him, planning to meet up with him in Colorado, but none of them knew that it would be the last time they would see Matthew. While his car was being repaired, Matthew decided to stay in Mammoth Lakes and enjoy a few more days in the mountains. He sent a text to his friends, jokingly saying, "I may have to stay here forever in Mammoth." The last time Matthew contacted his family was when he called his parents on July 16, 2013. The next day, Matthew was supposed to pick up his repaired car, but he never showed up at the garage. The police were notified when Matthew failed to pick up his car and mysteriously disappeared. As authorities investigated, they discovered that Matthew's campsite was still intact, with no signs of a struggle or an animal attack. His personal belongings, including his credit cards, were left untouched, with no indication that they had been used after his disappearance. However, something strange was found at his campsite, a few torn-out pages from a mountaineering book, which hinted at the Minarets and Ritter Range, a rugged area in the Ansel Adams Wilderness. This clue led the search teams to focus on the Minarets area, a place known for its treacherous and dangerous terrain. However, no one knew for sure if Matthew had actually gone there, as he hadn't mentioned his plans to anyone. This uncertainty caused significant difficulties for the search teams, as they had no clear starting point in their search for him. The search teams scoured every corner of the area, but found no trace of Matthew. The search lasted for several weeks, but all efforts were in vain. Every small lead led to a dead end, and Matthew seemed to have vanished from the earth without leaving any trace. Meanwhile, Matthew's family and friends held out hope for a miracle. But the heartbreaking reality was that there was no evidence to suggest that Matthew was still alive. In September 2013, after weeks of unsuccessful searching, Matthew's case was officially classified as an unresolved disappearance. Authorities found no evidence of third-party involvement, and the most widely accepted theory was that Matthew had met with an accident while climbing. However, Matthew's friends, who knew his climbing skills and experience well, found it hard to believe that he could have had an accident without leaving any trace. Years have passed, and Matthew's disappearance remains one of the biggest mysteries in the Mammoth Lakes area. No one knows what really happened to him. Matthew's story is not just a warning about the dangers of solo climbing, but also a mysterious tale of a man who vanished without a trace in an area he was very familiar with. The disappearance of Matthew Green has led many to question the hidden dangers of nature and what can truly happen when people face elements beyond their control. Despite the many efforts made to find answers, Matthew's case remains an unsolved mystery, a story without an ending in the history of strange disappearances. The next part will continue to explore other strange disappearances, each carrying its own mystery, challenging human efforts to understand and unravel the unexplainable. On February 24, 1978, 5 men from Yuba City, California, Jackie Hewitt, Bill Sterling, Jack Madruga, Ted Wire, and Gary Mathias, attended a college basketball game in Chico, California. Later, they became widely known across the nation as the Yuba County Five. Surveillance footage from a convenience store captured the group buying snacks and drinks after the basketball game. This was likely the last time anyone saw them alive. After a search began, the police found Jack Madruga's car stuck in a snowbank on a highway in the Paulides National Forest, far off the route they should have taken from Chico to Yuba. However, there was no trace of the other 4 men. It wasn't until months later, when the snow melted, more information came to light. In June 1978, the bodies of 4 of the men were found scattered within a 20-mile radius from the car in the forest. Gary Mathias's body has never been found. To this day, no one knows what happened to these young men or why they were in the forest in the first place. Jackie Hewitt, Bill Sterling, Jack Madruga, Ted Wire, and Gary Mathias were 5 young men from Yuba City, California, ranging in age from 24 to 32. All 5 had mild developmental disabilities and lived with their families, but they were independent enough to take care of themselves on short trips. Madruga owned a Mercury Montego, which he often drove to take the group on outings. All 5 men played basketball together at the Yuba City Rehabilitation Center, and they were scheduled to participate in a tournament hosted by California State University, Sacramento, on February 25th, according to Historic Mystery. The winner would receive a week-long trip to Los Angeles, and they were all determined to win the prize. However, the night before the tournament, they attended another basketball game. The 5 men, traveling in Madruga's Mercury, drove 50 miles to California State University, Chico, to watch a game between the university's team and UC Davis. After the game, they stopped by a convenience store to buy candy and chocolate milk for the drive home. A witness saw them drive away, heading toward Yuba City. They never made it back. The next morning, the families of all 5 men noticed that their sons hadn't returned home. They weren't the kind of group that stayed out late, and they certainly wouldn't have missed the basketball tournament. Madruga's mother called the police, and the search for the Yuba County Five began. There was no sign of the 5 men in Chico or Yuba City. Fortunately, a forest ranger from the U.S. Forest Service happened to discover Madruga's car stuck in a snowbank in Paulides National Forest on February 27, 1978. The car was nearly 50 miles in the opposite direction of the route they should have taken. Aside from the car, there was no evidence that they had been in the area. Even though 5 grown men could have easily pushed the car out of the snowbank, the car showed no signs of having been tampered with. According to the Washington Post, the car still had about a quarter of a tank of gas, and there were some maps in the glove compartment. Keys were missing. The police immediately launched a search around the forest, but a major snowstorm forced them to halt their effort. Later, a man named Joseph Shawns provided information about a strange incident that occurred on the night of February 24, 1978. According to the Crime Wire, Shawns was driving on the same road where the missing men's car was found, heading to check on his cabin in the forest, when he also got stuck in a snowbank. He then suffered a heart attack while trying to free his car and collapsed in pain, rendering him unable to move. Around 11:30 p.m., he saw headlights on the road. He reported seeing a group of men get out of a car, along with a woman holding a baby. He called out for help, and the group, who had been talking, paused upon hearing Shawns' call, but then disappeared. Shawns mentioned that about 2 hours later, he saw another set of headlights, but he still couldn't get anyone to help. When Shawns recovered, he attempted to walk down the mountain to find assistance, and Madruga's car was in the same spot where he had seen the group of men the night before. It's unclear whether Shawns actually saw the Yuba County Five, whether they really had a woman and a baby with them, or if he simply imagined the scene in his pain-induced, semi-conscious state. His story only added to the mystery of the case. However, it was the only lead investigators had to go on, at least until the snow melted in the spring. It wasn't until June, 4 months after they disappeared, when the snow began to thaw, that investigators received their first clue. On June 4, 1978, a group of motorcyclists discovered the body of Ted Weyer in a trailer belonging to the Forest Service, about 20 miles from where the car had been abandoned. Ted was lying on a bed, covered with 8 layers of blankets, and had died from hypothermia. But the strange thing was that the trailer was stocked with canned food and had a gas tank for heating, yet there was no sign that Ted had used them to keep warm or sustain himself. Why would someone in danger not use the available resources to save themselves? This question remains unanswered. John Thompson, a special investigator with the California Department of Justice, shared, "There is no explanation for this case, but there are countless leads. Every day, thousands of leads are discovered." Investigators were unable to find any trace indicating that a woman and a child had been present on the mountain road the night. The Yuba County Five disappeared. Nevertheless, the families of the victims believe that something went wrong that night. "Maybe something pressured them into going up the mountain," said Mabel, the mother of Jack Madruga. "We are certain of that, even though it's hard to imagine anyone being able to control 5 grown men. But we know that something happened. Perhaps they witnessed something they shouldn't have at the basketball game," suggested Ted Weyer's cousin, who theorized that someone committed a crime and the 5 men discovered it, leading to their silencing. To this day, the mystery of the Yuba County Five remains unsolved. Everything is still speculative. Investigators have been unable to determine whether the 5 men were intentionally harmed by someone, but there is no other explanation for what happened. According to the San Francisco Chronicle, this case remains under investigation and continues to haunt the Yuba County Sheriff's Office more than 40 years later. A 4-year-old child suddenly disappears, prompting a massive search, only to return unharmed to the embrace of their family. It seemed like a happy ending to a troubling event, but as the family rejoiced in their reunion, no one could have guessed that this was just the prelude to an unresolved mystery. This story might sound like the plot of a Hollywood horror film, but it is real and happened to a family named Dunbar in Louisiana, USA in 1912. Bobby Pankman, a 4-year-old boy, disappeared at Deep Lake, located in northeastern Washington, on August 3, 1963. At the time, Bobby was on a camping trip with his family, and that day his mother had taken him and his 2 brothers aged 6 and 10 on a short walk around the campsite. It is unclear exactly what happened during the walk, but somehow Bobby became separated from his mother and siblings. 2 days into the search efforts, authorities had no idea what might have happened in this incident. A boy from Spokane became the subject of an extensive search on Monday in the rugged countryside nearby. Searchers probed the waters of Deep Lake, searching for the boy who was reported missing on Saturday. There were no clues about his disappearance. Stevens County Sheriff A.E. Halter stated that bloodhounds were unable to pick up the boy's trail. At the time of his disappearance, nothing unusual seemed to have occurred. Family did not hear Bobby cry out or anything of the sort, and there was no evidence to suggest that an animal was responsible, something we will discuss shortly. First, there was something strange. On the 5th day of the search, no trace of Bobby was found. The boy from Spokane was barefoot and wearing a swimsuit at the time. Hope was briefly raised on Wednesday morning when a child's footprint was discovered. A bloodhound from Seattle picked up on this footprint. The 80-pound animal, named Caesar, was unable to uncover any further trail. The footprint was assumed and treated as Bobby's, but it appeared to be a single solitary print with no others around it, which was odd, and for that same reason it seemed to stand alone. Also important to note that the footprint was found off the main trail, and searchers had used clearing tools to help them move through the dense areas. It seems that after the dog failed to pick up any further trace beyond this footprint, hope began to fade, and Sheriff Halter essentially stated that he had no more ideas on how to handle the case. While facing the fading hope, the search continued and was set to last at least until Sunday. We are at the point of desperation. We don't know where to look next or what approach to use. the sheriff said when describing the search. The sheriff also added that the search area had been expanded and more members had been brought in, but the terrain was so rugged that it was hard to believe that little Bobby could have gotten too far on his small feet. This is when people began to blame bears or another animal, and it seemed that the sheriff and the search leaders already knew this wasn't the case, as it had been considered once before. But put an end to the speculation. Some search teams with bear hunting dogs went into the hills yesterday. Sheriff Halter said that this move should either prove or disprove the theory that some wild animal might have taken the boy. These efforts provided no evidence whatsoever that a bear was in the area. It's also important to note that if this had been the result of an animal, it would be highly likely the family would have heard the event take place. Now, the sheriff mentioned something interesting. Instead of a disappearance due to walking off, the sheriff began to contemplate the possibility of a disappearance from above. I could go along with the possibility that he was taken by an eagle, but it's difficult to accept the boy's disappearance by a bear or a cougar, the sheriff said. This is the first time I think I've ever seen a search leader blame an eagle or a creature from above. But when you examine the details, you can begin to see why Bobby might have disappeared right before everyone's eyes. There was no sound or anything to indicate something was wrong. For that reason, it becomes difficult to argue that someone took him. An animal attack would have been very obvious, unmistakable, and frankly, Dante. Evidence of that kind would have been left behind, was never found. That led the sheriff to think about the eagle. But even with that, I'm almost certain you would have heard it go down, and there would have been a scream or something like that from Bobby. But nothing like that happened. These were the final words on the incident. A day-long search by more than 200 people yesterday failed to find any trace of Bobby, and the authorities were reluctant to announce that the official search was over. No trace of Bobby was found in a week of searching. It's all over now, Sheriff Halter announced. Anyone who wants to can come up and look, but the official search is over. This is one of those rare incidents where not only was Bobby never found, nor even a clue about him, but the authorities and searchers alike had absolutely no idea what took place that day. They seemed to rule out everything, which only made the incident all the more confusing. It seems that the lone footprint only served to make things worse in that regard, because the dogs couldn't follow it anywhere. Perhaps that was another reason that led the sheriff to remark about being taken by an eagle. Whatever the case may be, can't imagine that we will ever know. And that's also the end of the paper trail. I happened to come across one of the strangest, if not the strangest, disappearance cases I've ever reported on this channel. This is one of those disappearances where some elements of the case don't make sense right from the start. Let's take a look at it in a peculiar way. On June 28th, we received an update from cbc.ca stating that searchers had found the body of a missing man. Foul play had been ruled out. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police, RCMP, reported that volunteer search teams had found the body of a missing Fort Simpson man near the North Nahanni River in the Northwest Territory. The body they were referring to belonged to David Horsey, and they found him deep in the brush, nearly 2.5 miles from the cabin. Here are some more interesting details. The RCMP said that David's body was found intact, and foul play was not suspected. A member of the search team, Jonas Antuin, mentioned that David had burns on his hands and arms. That will tell us the cause of death, and it will provide some closure to the unanswered questions we've had for the last 7 to 10 days, said RCMP Corporal Al Shepard. Shepard mentioned that the area had been searched several times before the body was found. It was unclear whether the body had been there initially, or if it was missed due to the thick brush. That piece of information, I suppose, will never be fully understood. Now, only those involved might know the answer to that, but in fairness, they might not even be completely sure themselves. Now, is this just a coincidence, or is it something more? Search teams reported that the body they found in the North Nahanni River on Thursday night belonged to Fred Hardesty. The searchers had found David Horsey's body in the brush not far away the previous week. People from Fort Simpson and other communities had spent nearly a month combing through the dense brush. The body discovered on Thursday night was found floating in the river about 12 miles from the cabin. This was an area that search teams had covered multiple times by canoe and on foot along the shore. So here we have both men who were found separately, exactly 10 days apart, both in areas that had been searched multiple times before without success. Is that just a coincidence, or at some point, do you have to consider the possibility that they might have been placed there after the fact? Now, who, when, and how are things that are beyond comprehension, especially given the number of people searching in the area. And it doesn't matter who you are. Carrying a fully grown man through rugged terrain is no easy or simple task. Let me be clear, this is purely speculation, but I would be surprised if the authorities didn't quietly explore the possibility of third-party involvement. Jonas Antoine was also part of the search team that found Frederick, and he expressed confusion, which I can understand fairly well. He said that while it was a relief that they had been found, there were still many unanswered questions about what had actually happened. Now, after that, as far as I can tell, there was complete silence for 13 years, until May 2018. This is when we learned some very interesting things, and I promised you some contradictions to what Officer Brad Parker had previously stated. First, let's get some more information. The family members of the two men are calling for the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, RCMP, to reopen the case. The family said they were not satisfied with the way the investigation was conducted, and they want answers. The two men had been missing for nearly a month before their bodies were found. It was determined that David died from hypothermia and Frederick drowned, according to David's brother. Later, David's sister mentioned that she wasn't convinced the investigation was very thorough, and I get the impression that they were left somewhat in the dark. This whole situation makes me think that the authorities were well aware that this incident was highly unusual and perhaps didn't have all the answers. David's sister posed this question: how could two men in one weekend both die, one in the river and one in the bush? It's very unsettling. There's no closure. Now, let's really consider this. There was something else that happened. Joseph Horsier, David's stepbrother, was part of the search party for the two men, and he said they found strange things at the cabin. Weapons had been discharged all over the place, one of them leaving a hole in the floor. The bigger picture isn't just two men, one who died from hypothermia and the other from drowning. Something else happened before all of this came down. Now, call me crazy, but it seems that after you find such a scene at the cabin, where there is clear evidence that something had happened, and then you find the bodies, how do you not entertain the possibility that the two events might be related in some way? One of three things must be true here. Joseph and the family were mistaken about the findings inside the cabin, which doesn't seem to be the case, or the investigators were careful not to reveal the whole picture for some reason, or the most incompetent people on Earth were in charge of the investigation. One of these things must be true. How do you not consider a link between the two findings unless it was done so quietly behind the scenes? When Brad said there were no apparent signs of any problems that we could see, am I the one losing my mind? Or if what the family says is true, does that feel like a major case of gaslighting? No apparent signs of any problems that we could see, except for the clear signs of a disturbance in the cabin. The question that needs to be asked, based on what has been said, is that something significant seemed to have happened while the men were inside the cabin, as they discharged their firearms all over the place, according to Joseph. Why did they do that? According to the authorities, there was no evidence of foul play, and according to Joseph, the shots appeared to have been fired from inside the cabin. Who or what were they shooting at? Did they discover that someone else was inside the cabin with them? Or did some animal get inside? It seems to me that David and Frederick must have been scared of something. Otherwise, they wouldn't have fired wildly like that. What exactly happened inside the cabin? That is truly strange, and I don't have a good explanation, nor do I have an explanation as to why these details were promptly overlooked. They weren't even reported until 13 years later. Let's be clear, neither of the two men was hit by anything. David had burns on his hands and arms, while no injuries were mentioned for Frederick, and the family didn't mention any either. So it can only be assumed that there weren't any worth mentioning, or else they would have been brought up, and to be fair, these things are usually noted. In any case, how did David end up with burns on his hands and arms? The official conclusion indicates that David's death was due to hypothermia. So could David have been trying to start a fire and then burned himself? If that's true, it would imply that he had a fire going at some stage. So why did he choose to leave it if he was cold and freezing? Does that make sense? Secondly, why did the two of them split up? The entire situation reeks of fear, from the findings inside the cabin to leaving the cabin unprepared and then splitting up. Why did any of that happen? Could David have left the fire to try and find Frederick? Of course, everything I'm saying now is pure speculation. Something here doesn't add up, and I can see why the family started raising these questions, right? Here's some more information. Both David and Frederick were described as experienced outdoorsmen. Robert Hardesty, Frederick's brother, said his family wasn't satisfied with the way the police handled the case either. There's too much evidence. They didn't look at what we found, he added, noting that they found his brother's shirt with a big hole in it, as if it had been shot. However, when you include the oddities inside the cabin, that becomes less likely, especially when coupled with the fact that both men were found in areas that had already been searched before. It's very difficult to draw any solid conclusions here because it's essentially impossible to see the full picture. What do you think happened? Do you suspect third-party involvement, foul play, or was this just some kind of accident? Do you think that the findings inside the cabin were related to the disappearance? Mysterious disappearances like those of Andrew Warburton, Matthew Green, the Yuba Five, Bobby Panknin, and David Horsier, along with Frederick Hardesty, share common elements. Sudden disappearances, strange traces, and unanswered questions. Each story is a complex puzzle that challenges human efforts in search and investigation. Though the victims came from different backgrounds and locations, they all encountered inexplicable situations. These disappearances not only evoke fear about human vulnerability in the face of the wild, but also open up theories about the possible existence of supernatural elements or forces that science has yet to explain. These stories are interconnected not just by their mystery, but by the fragility of life, where even a small mistake or an unexpected situation can lead to a disappearance without a trace. And until there are answers, these disappearances will remain unsolved mysteries, challenging our imagination and understanding of the world around us.